Hi, everyone. Welcome to our chats with Linda Riesenberg Fisler. I'm your host and really excited because I get to talk to two wonderful people today, very creative people. I'm going to be talking with my old friend, Michael Harding. You all know that I use Michael's paints. I think the trade, we call him the color man. Are we still doing that, Michael, calling you the color man?
Yeah, I'm called quite a number of things now. Yeah, hi everybody.
Yeah, so this is probably our fourth or fifth, I think, our chat that we've done, um,
Yeah,
somewhere in there. So we're very used to having Michael talking with us and all this. But painting in the background, they're actually painting. I think Tim is painting a portrait of Michael while we're doing this. So this will really be interesting. So welcome to the show, Tim Rees. Nice to have you
thank
here.
you.
Yeah, so give us a little background, Tim. Like I said, folks are very familiar with Michael that have listened to my podcast, but give us a little of your background.
Well, I started painting about 10 years ago. I didn't really have any formal instruction. I took a brief workshop at the Scottsdale Artist School and started painting and in Arizona. And then I heard about the palette and chisel in Chicago where you could go and get models every day of the week and just go to open studios. So I immediately moved to Chicago that year and just spent 3 years painting from models pretty much every day until it got to the point where I was able to sell paintings through a gallery and I no longer needed to work anymore. And so after a few years of painting, I quit work and just kept on painting.
Started the real work, you mean?
Started the real work. Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
Much harder work, I should say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have an atelier, is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, I moved back to Scottsdale, and I was teaching at the Scottsdale Artist School for quite a while, and I started a traditional training program there for them. And then we wanted to kind of expand upon it a bit more, so I rented out a warehouse in Mesa, right next to Scottsdale, and it's about just under 4,000 square foot warehouse, and we turned it into a large art studio. And so now I work there, and I have about a dozen or so apprentices who work there as well, each kind of at their own different level. And that's pretty much where I spend most of my time now.
Cool. So as we're going through this, we're going to be taking pictures of what Tim is painting. I was going to say printing, get out of my writer's mind and into my artist's mind. But yeah, so we'll have pictures that when this is over, I will attach the pictures to our audio and upload it on YouTube and let you all know so that you can watch Tim painting Michael's while we're talking. So today,
Yeah,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, I tried yesterday to do a little bit of video. My technical abilities with my camera aren't great, and although we were able between to shoot a little video, I think there must be some sort of like smart setting that you get on phones, because as the camera looks at Tim's painting, it's clearly recognizing that it's a face and trying to do clever things, sort of blending and softening, so that, you know, where it's normally used for, you know, looking at a human being directly, Tim's painting is so good that it's obviously confusing the camera, and it's blending colors, and when we played it back, it looked totally flat. So I'm hoping that we can have another go later on today and see if we can get the camera to unprogram itself and just relay what it's seeing honestly, rather than trying to smooth things up.
Okay.
Hopefully we can get a little bit of video in there as well for you.
Okay. Well, and that worked fine because I have editing capabilities, so I can edit in video and I can edit in pictures. So no worries. Whatever I get, I'll make it work.
I just think the video is going to be worth it, because, as I say, it was terrible when we looked the other day. But yeah, certainly still photographs, no problem.
Right. Okay. So I asked Michael to come on the show today because I receive, when I'm teaching, a lot of questions about mediums and what to use to varnish your paintings and all of that. And I'm no expert. I use them the way that I use them. And actually, I don't really use mediums because I like Michael's paints the way they are. So I'm not the person to ask about mediums. Michael and Tim are. So that's why we're having them on the show and to talk about these. And Michael, let's start off with PM1, oil paint medium.
Yeah, before I leap in and describe them individually, I just want to make
General
something
comments?
philosophically clear about mediums, and I think you've just touched upon it, which made me think of it.
Oh, okay.
You only need to use a medium if you can't achieve with the paint what is in your mind's eye anyway. There's no rule that says you have to be using a medium as some type of activator. And as you found, if the paint works straight from the tube, then you don't need to overcomplicate things by if you see what I'm getting at. If you can lay down brushstrokes as they appear in your mind's eye without having to adjust the paint, then that's better. Because as soon as you put another element, I won't call it a gamble, but another potential wild card in the pack, something that can be harder to control or do its own thing, you're complicating the process. And I often try and emphasize to artists that really, if you can achieve without a medium, so much the better.
Right.
I know you're probably thinking, well, why is he saying that? Because he's potentially talking himself out of sales. But to be honest, as an artist here, if you can achieve without a medium, then don't use one. But anyway, coming back to your kickoff, Linda. Yeah, PM1. And sorry, I'm just going to keep backpedaling on this, but people often say to me, "Oh, what medium should I be using?" Or "What's this one for?" Or "What will this one not do?" And to be honest, it's for the individual artist to decide. It's not as if I make rules and this medium can only be used for this purpose and that's it. Something else will go wrong. It's not the case. And these mediums are almost to sort of play around and see if you like the effects. Sometimes they'll speed drying, sometimes they'll slow it. Sometimes they're designed to make the paint more sort of transparent and translucent and simply flow further. And it's for each individual artist to literally play around them and see if they work for them. As I say, most artists find that paint straight from the tube is how it works with my paint anyway. Incidentally, forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but I remember talking on one of your earlier chats, Linda, and I remember making this point that we did a bit of market research a year or two back and found that actually people who used our mediums generally were using them with other brands of paint for that very reason. That and I'm not going to start naming other brands; it would be unfair to. And
right.
they ethically make paint to the best of their understanding of how they'd like it to be, and it's slightly different from ours, of course.
Right.
But we tend to find that our mediums get used with other brands of paint a lot, and often much more than with our own brand, which is sort of slightly amusing in a way. But I mean, what more can I say about that? I'm delighted people are using the mediums, and maybe it'll tempt them to change over and try a little bit of our paint and see the other qualities of the paint. Right. But yeah, okay, PM1, just to get it going. PM1 is probably the simplest of our mediums. It consists of pale linseed oil, which is our lightest shade that we can get, refined linseed oil, with gum turpentine. And it's really designed just to give the paint, should we say, a little more ease, a little more flow. Yes, you can be glazing with it. But it really is just designed to mobilize and make the paint flow. The brush strokes will tend to smooth themselves out because clearly the more liquid the paint is, the less likely it is to hold a brush mark, and it's therefore the simplest. People love it. I mean, it's just, I know Vicky Norman's had a lot of success with it. It just does what it does, and it's, as I keep saying, it's for each individual artist to find where it works. I mean, Tim will tell you that sometimes he'll know whether to use a bit of varnish instinctive, not varnish, bit of medium within a painting, or not. As we're painting here today, I think I'm right in saying, Tim, you're not using anything, are you?
No, I'm not using anything.
I think, just to sort of elaborate on the painting he's doing at the moment, Tim came and stayed with us about 11 months ago and started the painting. He did about 3 or 4 hours work and just laid down some initial areas. Yeah. You could see it was a portrait of me, but that was really just about it. Oh. It was toning down his shadows, and he's been with us now for about another sort of 5 days, and every other day, punctuated by trips into the Museum of Fine Art in Boston.
Okay, now
which was a great experience itself as well. We saw the Freuds. And it's just, I mean, he's a dear friend of mine, and of course we've got quite a lot in common. Although he's about 30 years my junior, we talk a lot, and he's just a great guy to hang out with, and we share very similar philosophies on painting. God, I'm rambling on, aren't I? But yeah, so I mean, yeah, Tim at the moment is not using a medium.
Cool.
And there's not a lot to say about it, Linda, because it'll either work for people or it won't. And I just invite people to try it. I mean,
well, let me help you here, Michael. Okay.
Yeah.
So a lot of my students have a bad habit, and I do
Yeah.
too, of dipping my brush into my turpentine to get a little more flow in the
Yeah.
and I should probably have PM1 because a turpentine does stuff to your paints that we don't like or you don't like. Right?
Oh, well, when you say, okay, I have to clarify on that.
Okay.
Things like mineral spirits, odorless mineral spirits,
Right.
various solvents that are commercially available, they make paint dry, matte, and dull, and also, I believe, cause embrittlement. The experiments I've conducted show that they'll actually damage the integrity of the oil. In the PM1, it's genuine turpentine, a pine resin, and linseed oil mixed together. And although there's a minor percentage of the turpentine that evaporates out, it leaves there for a residue, a resin, which of course adds to the actual integrity of the paint. In the case of mineral spirits and those odorless things, they will probably 99.9% evaporate back out. And I did a bit of research a number of years ago, and I spoke to a chemist friend of mine, and he said that if hypothetically you were able to see under a really, really powerful microscope, linseed oil, it consists of the molecules are sort of chains. And when you add a solvent, it breaks those chains. And of course, then the solvent evaporates off, and you'd normally expect or think that those chains are going to reform. They do not. Now, if you also think about the structure of paint, paint is really pigment glued into place by oil or resins. So you're just gluing color into place. Now, anything you do to harm, damage, weaken the integrity of that resin, if you like, that oil, is to be avoided, because we want to make paintings that are physically going to hold together for hundreds of years in gallery conditions. And of course, anything you do to the paint which could potentially compromise it, I frown upon and try and steer artists away. Okay, use those solvents and things to clean up your brushes afterwards. Although I know Rosemary from Rosemary & Co. would also, probably if she were here, add that those solvents also can dry I forget, I have to be polite here. I think the phraseology she used was something I probably can't repeat publicly, but it does something very negatively to her brushes. And I think what she was saying is a bit like you're taking your hair to the hairdressers. They end up frazzled and fried. If you imagine washing your hair in mineral spirits, it's not going to be too long, of course, before your hair would be, shall we say, damaged and needing attention, and because all the ends would be brittle and so on. So the same thing can happen with bristles. So yeah, I'm afraid I don't like it in the artist studio at all. Yeah, use it to wipe your palette with and potentially clean up your brushes, but they, I think, are too fierce. And the fact that they're petroleum extracts generally, yeah, even washing up detergent, I think, does a better job of cleaning brushes than solvents.
Right.
But that's me on my rant. Sorry about that, everybody.
No, and that's okay, because if I sit listening to the chemistry that you just went through, and if I think about my underpaintings where I use a lot of the turpentine to just get a very, very thin paint, I'm actually starting off my foundation with a very dull painting. I mean, I've already ruined those links, those chains.
Okay, I don't know if your sound quality was good your end, Linda, but you sounded like you had elastic bands in your mouth then.
Oh, really?
So I don't know if you just want to repeat that paragraph again.
Okay. So I'd start off when I'm painting to get a underpainting, if you will, a foundation. I will use turpentine with your paints, Michael, and make it very, very loose and thin and put that on there. So what I'm doing is automatically starting with a very dull and unstable base to my painting because I've changed that chemistry.
Yeah, I understand. And when you say turpentine, you mean genuine gun turpentine or triple distilled or one of those?
Odorless terp. It may be a mineral oil, but I think it's just odorless terp, to tell you the truth.
Okay, that's the one I dread.
Yeah.
Because that will damage the integrity of your paint. I would invite you to explore using PM1 in that context.
Yeah.
It will just make the painting, it will do exactly what you want it to achieve. In other words, spreading around. I mean, the way I paint is I take an umber and just draw, you use a brush to draw with the umber and get tonal values and check my design out, my composition.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I do too.
Yeah, I would suggest that you leave that odorless terp, short for turpentine, which is not really a turpentine, it's petroleum.
Right.
You're a naughty girl. That's exactly what I'm going on about.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I get most of my questions about. You know, it's like, I want to thin this down. And of course, you know, that's the way I was taught. And now I know it's a bad habit and I need to break that.
Sure.
So that's why I wanted to get at that. I mean, and I don't care if you yell at me, you know me by now.
I know you can break it. The other thing is, I know some people will have difficulty. Some people get headaches from the odors of turpentine.
Right.
And you should always, with all these mediums that have turpentine in, you should be painting in a well-ventilated area. They can make you go a little bit loopy.
Mm-hmm. They can.
So just ventilate your studios.
Yeah. And you know, the funny thing is after I get done with that foundation, that the burnt umber or the sienna or whatever I use to get my drawing and my tones and values and everything in place, the funny thing is I never open my turpentine little jar ever again throughout the whole painting. So
that's better.
Yeah. So now I mean, if I do open, it's to clean a brush, and then I end up putting the brush aside and getting another brush. It's not like I don't have enough brushes.
I mean,
so
clearly, you realize I'm very puritanical about this. So you might decide to veto what I've just said, but I just try and give everyone as much information and knowledge that I've learned over the years from various observations. So yeah, if you're naughty like Linda, then and that's your MO, your modus operandi, I know you'll carry on with it. You could also just consider putting a few drips of linseed oil into the paint, which will give it the same sort of mobilization. Not too thick for obvious reasons, otherwise you're going to be starting to compromise the fat over lean principle. You don't want oily, greasy layers too much. The other thing, of course, about turpentine, I'm talking genuine turpentines now from pine trees rather than from the oil industry. Mm-hmm. When it dries, it tends to make things dry very matte looking, and that's why you'll find it in the old-fashioned matte varnish, because it's beeswax and turpentine, and both those ingredients dry matte. So that's another consideration. Of course, in the technique that Linda and I are describing, that level of paint's going to be completely buried anyway.
Right.
So it doesn't really matter that level has gone matte.
Yeah, but aren't you still? I mean, is it unstable enough that it would affect the layers above it?
Oh, probably not. It's just that I know that if people have it in a pot next to them,
they tend to use
they're going to start having, you know, that arm is going to inadvertently keep dipping in there from time to time.
Right.
The latter layers of paint, and it's just not it just worries me. I mean, yeah, when you've got, particularly if you're painting on an acrylic primer, you notice I won't use the term gesso because I think we shouldn't be allowed to use the term acrylic gesso. That's another personal rant of mine. If you're painting on acrylic primers, you probably get away with it more because acrylic primers tend to be slightly more porous, and so the mineral spirit, petroleum, is going to soak in a bit and become part of the buried in the integrity of the actual primer itself. So you're going to be better off if you're working on, say, a pre-oil primed canvas, which can be problematic anyway for a lot of people. I was talking at length with a British artist today because he'd had some problems with pre-primed oil linen, and he was starting to get, he'd had over the years had some paintings flaking off, and that interface between the layers and the pre-primed is a concern, and I've got a few theories about why that is. I'm still researching that to sort of figure out what's causing these to go wrong there. Yeah, these layer things are fundamental to the painting, and this is really what these conversations about fat over lean are.
Mm-hmm.
And I try and stress to artists sort of, if we know that we can stick on the steady path and away from the edges where things can go wrong by stretching ingredients to do things they're not really designed for, or putting things in which are going to weaken the layers, and I try and make artists aware of it, and at least then you can err on the side of caution. What I wouldn't want you doing, Linda, is finding that if I came into your studio, you were using the odorless spirits throughout your painting.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Why would I do that to your paint?
Exactly. No, I know. It's like spoiling a wonderful bottle of wine, diluting it with water, isn't it? Who would want to do such a thing?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So Tim, real quickly, can you tell us what's on your palette right
now? All the colors. Yeah.
Yeah, the colors and what other things you're using, and you can even talk about the brushes too, since we're all friends with Rosemary and Simi.
Well, you know, a disclaimer about the brushes, just in case.
Okay, never mind.
Here, I showed up here with no art supplies whatsoever. So yeah, we've got a spattering of everything in that regard, but I kind of picked up whatever was available here.
We have got plenty of Rosemary's hair, whether it happens to be in Tim's hand at any one moment. I mean, there's several.
I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's several nice brushes here which he's working with. But anyway, go on, Tim, talk about colors.
Yeah, the colors. So I've grown really fond of a kind of set of colors, which luckily Michael had on hand here. And I divide my palette into yellows and then reds and then blues, from lightest to darkest in each group. And so for the yellows, I'm working with a lead tin yellow, a nice light yellow, which does a nice job at subtly modifying the color I'm using without really dominating it. And then I have a yellow lake. Is this a light yellow lake?
Show me the tube.
Yellow lake.
Then that's just the mid-tone. That's it's quite a green shade, yellow. Those of you who are familiar with my paints would be aware of it. There is a brighter version, but Tim's working with a mid one, so it's sort of, it has, it would be the sort of tonally about the same as a cadmium yellow middle.
Yeah.
Okay.
He likes it because, of course, it's transparent, and a lot of, I'm talking for him now. It'd be probably better for me to let him talk about that aspect. But anyway, back to you, Tim.
Okay, yeah. And then next to that, I've got a yellow lake deep. So it's sort of a warmer, deeper shade that has a lot of punch to it. And then next to that, I've got a yellow ochre deep. And then next to that, a transparent oxide yellow, and then a transparent oxide brown. So I've got a nice range of powerful yellows, which I've started to, you know, rely more heavily on the yellows for portrait painting than I ever have before. The reds, I've got a red lake, scarlet red lake,
Scarlet Lake.
Scarlet Lake,
yeah.
Which is a sort of rich, powerful red, kind of like a cadmium, but I find it to be even more useful than a cadmium. Then next to that, transparent oxide red and an alizarin. And then in the blues, I've got a king's blue, and then one of my favorite colors, this phthalo with zinc white.
Oh, the phthalocyanine blue with zinc white.
Yeah.
Incidentally, folks, we've changed the formulation on that. That is now phthalocyanine and titanium white.
Oh, okay.
Because of the outcry about zinc whites, we, like many paint makers, we've sort of been monitoring what the Smithsonian and one or two other institutes have been finding out. And it's been known for decades that the integrity of zinc wasn't quite as we'd hoped. And so, again, erring on this side of caution, we've removed it from our mixes. So from now on, folks, you'll see that the color is actually phthalocyanine blue and titanium white. And yeah, that is I think I've explained that one.
Yeah, that's good. And then an ultramarine blue, an ivory black, and then at the very end of my palette, I've got this wonderful color called Terra Vert. Vert? right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love to just throw that. It's such a low kind of impact color that I can just put it right on top of my painting and give things a nice subtle green flavor without altering the color drastically.
Yeah.
And then for whites, I have a titanium white that I was using for the initial block-in and initial color mixtures. And then as soon as I had things kind of established, I switched over to stack lead white, which I'm now using to kind of goop and trail and create these textural pieces of flesh and really sculpt the canvas with.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say stack lead white. I knew that was going to be in there. So
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a lucky boy because it's but when not just in the obvious places where he will put like a nice like I'm sitting here wearing a white shirt, you'll see in the photographs, where he would have an excuse to take a nice bold brush stroke and do a white brush stroke. He's got to a surface now of the painting where my skin on the painting is actually starting to look like I've been skinned and put on the canvas surface, because he is almost recreating textural. It's almost looking like it's coming alive with human flesh there. Yeah. And I was looking at it, and Tim just said nonchalantly, that's the stack lead white in there, and that's another aspect to the handling of it. Mm-hmm. Am I describing it right, Tim?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna actually. I'm in the middle of this. Will kind of be interesting because I'm more landscape painter. So what I'm going to be using the stack lead white for is for the oceans, you know, the waves, the foam that lays on top of the ocean as it's crashing into rocks. In those areas where I'm going to be using the stack lead white and mixing it with actually one of your colors. So yeah, so it's kind of interesting, and I have used stack lead white on a painting that I did of El Capitan in Yosemite, just so that you could get that really on the. It's smooth, but there is texture there. So yeah, so I can just imagine what Tim is doing with the picture of you and getting your, you know, capturing your flesh, which is, Tim, that's kind of like something Rembrandt used to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, we were just visiting the museum yesterday, and it was, you know, not just Rembrandt gets a lot of credit. Go a lot right away. But we saw portrait after portrait after portrait where we'd be seeing, at least in a few areas, you know, you know, punctuations with the effects of stack lead white. And I'm sure that it was the white that was used for, you know, the majority of the painting, but you can really see the effects that are achieved only by that paint in almost every portrait, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and just to recap a little on that, there was lots of speculation when industrially made lead carbonate came along, because this looked like when you have understandably flow with painted brush strokes, you would naturally assume that it's the responsibility of an oil or a medium that's been added to achieve that goopy, ropey quality, and in this case, it's not.
Right.
Stack lead white made, and I'm sure some of you have heard me talk about this before, by suspending lead over vinegar and burying under horse poop, has a completely different type of pigment particle. Industrially made lead carbonates, which we also put into our cremlets, has a completely different handling quality. And the stack lead white, the only way to understand it is to see it what it does. I mean, we make it as thickly as we dare, and it's a devil to get into the tubes, and drives my guys mad because it's like trying to put cold butter into a paint tube. But as soon as you bring it out, squeeze a bit out, and agitate it, then it's highly thixotropic. It will start to almost have flow, and then re-solidify half a second after you leave it alone. It's really peculiar stuff. Yeah. And that's how, as Tim was saying, the old guys, you know, they were able to take it for granted because it was abundant for them. I'm making it the hard way in very limited batches.
Yes.
But it is, oh my goodness, I feel like I'm not as good a painter as Tim, unfortunately. He's really good. I'd love to sort of indulge myself and do sort of a painting, and I'd call it in homage of stack lead white, and it'd just be every excuse possible just to keep on dolloping the syrupy goopy, wonderful thing on, but the artistic ability, I think, would probably be missing. That's more Tim's department.
Right. And as long as you don't eat it, you're going to be fine.
Yeah, that's it. Don't try that at home, folks. Yeah.
It smells great, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know some of you will know this, that it also tastes sweet, and this is why the kids will pull it off old bits of furniture, little flakes, because lots of house paints, of course, in the old days were lead, and it tastes sweet. That's why the kids get a habit for it, and dogs, I'm told. A dog will start chewing a door corner, and for no apparent reason, it's because it tastes sweet.
Huh.
The Romans used to put it in their wine. If the wine was particularly dry and sour and rough, they would sweeten it by putting a bit of lead carbonate in, and then I can imagine them still complaining of the colics afterwards, because it would be, you can't even imagine what they'd be doing to themselves.
Yeah, I'm going to say that explains a lot of Roman history, I think. But
yeah, along with many other things that were going on. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's move on back to mediums, and let's talk about PM2, which is a Damar Glaze Medium.
Yeah, it's by far the most popular one we do, and as you said, it's specifically designed as a glaze medium. It's one of our few products where we actually do put a dryer in, and when I say a dryer, I mean a seccative. Many of you will know that if you put a metal in the presence of oil paint, and another example is if you leave paint out or overnight on a palette knife, you'll notice that the paint on the palette knife will dry quicker, and that's because of the presence of metal will have a catalytic effect upon the paint's drying. And the drying, of course, is its ability to absorb oxygen from the atmosphere. So it speeds that polymerization up. And so a seccative has a minute amount of metals in, and there's a whole array of metals which are used now in the context. We will be changing over soon because of the health and safety stuff around cobalts. We've been using a cobalt lanolate dryer. In minute quantities, I'm talking about a drip in the whole volume of the medium, sort of like 0.001%, whatever it might be. And that, of course, means that your glazing layers will dry that quicker. The other ingredients are linseed stand oil, which is a heat-treated linseed oil. Refiners of oils take linseed oil up to about 450 degrees centigrade. Sorry, I think in centigrade, having come from Europe, which is probably, I don't know, something like 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Incredibly hot, and don't allow it to have any air with it, and so it actually goes through a physiological change and ends up a lot more dense and goopy. The viscosity increases, it becomes thicker, slower flowing, and also has more gloss, and yellows less slightly, which is interesting and handy. And a bit of the turpentine again, and of course some Damar crystals dissolved. Damar crystals come from a tree from the Far East, and again it's another sort of dried tree resin which we dissolve into the turpentine. And I think that practice came about in sort of the 19th century. The Victorians particularly, I think, were absolutely obsessed with discovering weird and wonderful new materials from the New World, and so that stayed with us. It produces a very nice paint film, dries quite quickly. Sometimes you might find you achieve a better glaze if you have the painting down flat, so there's no danger of it running. A lot of artists also use it simply as a drying agent. They'll have some of it in their dipper and just periodically dip a brush in if they know they're working with some colors which can be problematic for slowness of drying, things like alizarin crimson or titanium white in poppy in safflower oil, for instance. Colors which you'll notice if you look on the side of the tubes, it says whether it's a slow, medium, or fast dryer. And if you've had to choose colors which happen to be slow drying, and you're a guy who wants your painting to be dry the next day, then yeah, that's one slightly naughty way that you can cheat. Now you probably think, well, why is it wrong if he's putting the dryer, the seccative, into his glaze medium? Why is it therefore okay there, but not in the normal integrity of the paint? And the reason is that, of course, glazing layers are much more fat because they have a lot more oil in,
Mm-hmm.
And so there's going to be a lot more give and flexibility. And by definition, they're more likely to be on the outer layers of the painting than more the finishing layers, and hence, you know, glazing. I mean, for those of you who might not know what a glaze is, when we're talking about a glaze, the simplest way I think I can describe it is for instance, if Tim's painting my portrait now, and one side of my face has got light on and one side is shadow. If he does the painting and he does a nice passage of brushwork throughout the shadow area and steps back and goes, oh no, that whole area should be darker. Oh, I'm going to have to redo it, and the 30 brush strokes and all the hard work and decision making that was involved in that. Oh dear, what annoying, how annoying, because I really like that area. If you like, it's a way of cheating. You, in that context, could take a bit of umber, put it into your glaze medium, so you've actually got a transparency, liquidy medium then, brown color, and put a very thin veil almost of the transparent color over that shadow area. And of course, that will be adding paint very, very thinly over those other brush strokes. So he would be deepening that shadow. And it's a sort of a little trick, if you know what I mean, so that you can increase the depth of that area, make it go down darker. Would you say that's a reasonable way of describing it, Tim?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I just had to give something in context, just so if there's anyone out there who doesn't know what a glaze is.
Right.
I mean, you might find that there's other areas you might want to do a hazy blue color, for instance, in your hills in your landscape. If you suddenly think, oh, that blue needs to come up a bit, and I've done all that detail work, so you could put and then you get into the scumbles where something's opaque.
Right.
And it would allow you to do that as well. So it's a way of mobilizing paint in a very thin veil over an area, just to give it a sort of, I mean, another way, if you did your landscape and decided, you know, I'm now going to convert it into a misty London scene, then you could just put a bit of white into a glaze medium, and that would be sort of thought of more of as a scumble. And I mean, I'm just being very clichéic in my description here, but I think people get the gist of what I'm talking about.
One thing that I want to make sure, because it has the word Damar in it, and this is a medium. This is not a varnish. They're two different.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Damar is quite an interesting material. When it dries, it goes quite sort of rigid and robust, and is very useful both as a glazing material and as a varnish. There's a slight area of debate, controversy, if you like. Discussions I've been having. Sometimes the people will quote the Ralph Mayer book, the Artist's Handbook of Methods and Techniques, because Ralph Mayer talks about using varnish, gloss varnish made of Damar, which we also. And the problem being that you should only paint or varnish a painting when it's had at least 6 months to dry, so that all the movement of that oil as it expands and contracts has settled down, and also more importantly, so that when you put your varnish layer over the top, there are two distinct different paint films. Mm-hmm. Because for those of you who don't know, a varnish is actually a temporary coating, theoretically, over a painting, and designed really just to be a dirt trap. So that when it's in a gallery for say 100 years, and you know, people have been coming in and out, and all the dirt from the air has been settling on the painting and giving it that dark, gloomy look. When the restorers remove the varnish, they remove the dirt with it. But of course, there's a danger that if you're removing a top coat of Damar varnish away from a lower layer, which is also Damar glaze, particularly, for instance, that example I gave of having created a shadow down one side of the face, the poor old restorer will be using cotton wool swabs to take off the old varnish, but he will inadvertently start taking off the brown glaze color that, say, Tim put on to enhance that shadow. So it's not a 100% sound technique. As a result, we're developing one or two other new varnishes, which they're still in prototype things, so I don't really want to elaborate on that too much, which are distinctly different materials from being Damar, which will hopefully get around this. Very exciting developments that. So I next time, hopefully, Linda, we can perhaps talk more about varnishes.
Yes.
And have some announcements.
Yeah, because I'm sure after this I'm going to get questions about, well, then what varnish should I be using? So,
Yeah, yeah,
so we
yeah,
might as well have a conversation about that as well. So
yeah.
let's jump into PM3 Resin Oil Wax Medium. By the way, all of these resin or mediums that we're talking about here are on Michael's website, and that's, where is it? michaelharding.co.uk.
Yeah,
And
.co.uk.
.uk, right? Is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
www.michaelharding, all one word, .co, that's .co.uk.
Yep. So
That's how we do that there, nice and awkward.
yeah, and we're just going right down the list. So if you want to open up your web browser and look at that while we're talking about it, that would work as well. So now,
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead, Michael.
yeah, people often say to me, what's this one for? A lot of people ask for sort of something with a bit more body so they can achieve an impasto meaning sort of paste-like. This will allow you to do that. And again, it dries with a certain sort of appealing sheen to it. It's like them all. It's one of those things that someone might pick it up and use it in a completely different way from the way, say, that I would use it. And I keep away from even saying the phrase how it's intended to be used, because it's really for artists to work out. You might find that you just love the way it brushes down to make nice, thin, hazy, transparent layers. On the other hand, you might find you like it because it imparts nice, buttery chunkiness to the paint. In some ways, I often think about these mediums as they're all there just to have fun with. Play around them, see what they do to the paint, see if it works for you, see if it doesn't.
Right.
So yeah, that's one way of sort of playing around with it, really.
So if I am like scared to death of lead, and by the way, there's like no substitute, but I could use the Resin Oil Wax Medium to build in texture.
Well, yeah, it's not going to go the same way as stack lead white, though. I mean, we're talking about a different creature altogether.
Right.
I know this might sound as a bit of torment for people out there, but when I do demo workshops and I get a globule of it out, and there's always that eureka moment, because I get a member of the public who usually squeeze the tube out, which I have to make sure it's someone with pretty strong thumbs.
Right.
And I can tell by their face they're thinking, oh, this has gone wrong, hasn't it? Because it comes out like stiff chewing gum, really dense. And then when you give it about 30 seconds of manipulation, it starts to give. And you get to the point where you can flick it around with a palette knife and you'll get it, I call it dancing. You get a strand to follow the palette knife up and go into the air up to 3 or 4 inches sometimes, like a piece of toffee. You know, a strand, a wisp will follow the palette knife or brush, whatever you're using, up. And then as soon as you stop moving, it'll stay there. And I've done this before where I demonstrate, it's almost like a hair's thickness of white paint, just like a thread. It's really peculiar. And some of you might be thinking, well, what's the use of that in my painting? Fine, absolutely. If you can't see a purpose for it, then this doesn't concern you.
Yeah.
It just has the most weird quality. Yeah, unfortunately, I can't say that this is an alternative. This medium's an alternative to that.
Yeah, because this will actually start to break down, right? As the more you manipulate it, the more it'll break down. Is that?
Sorry, you mean the stack lead white?
No, the Resin Oil Wax Medium.
Yeah, I mean, you'll find that the more you add it to oil paint, the more dissipated it will be in its own right. Some people like to warm it up slightly so that the beeswax is more mobilized.
Okay.
If it's been sitting for a while, sometimes it can go a bit chunky. The things we make are very touchy-feely. A lot of them are from things to do with nature, bleached beeswax in this case, rectified turpentine. These are nature's gifts, if you like, to us. They're not mass-produced things from the chemical industry. They're very hands-on, and so we find that sometimes each batch of beeswax is different, and it's simply because, hey guys, that's what the bees were doing that day. And so sometimes you might find that if you buy the wax medium one year, you might find it's very thick. You buy it the next year, it's slightly looser. you know, we try and aim to be consistent, but as I say, and in some ways I don't make apologies for this, you're working with Mother Nature, and Mother Nature is going to be different all the time. And it's, you know, for those of you who cook out there, as you know, every time you bake a cake or crack an egg, you know, very few eggs are alike. Seasonal things happen, and so that this is, you know, we are a band of people who are making things by hand, and I'm proud of the fact they're not consistent. I think it makes life more interesting to have a little bit of variation.
Right. I agree. So, do you want to move on to PM4? Tim, do you have anything that you want to jump in and say, or?
Well, not quite yet. My most of my experience, I dabbled in all of them, but I really started heavy to PM5, so I'll probably jump in when we get there.
Yeah, I know it's I know it's one of those things. Hey guys, let's do 5 first. Break the order, because I must admit 5 and 6 are my favorites. They just really pull paint together, don't they? Just but let's talk about 4.
Yeah,
let's be strong
very
here.
Quickly.
Yeah, yeah. PM4 is another variation on the same sort of theme of a beeswax paste with just different ingredients of the linseed oil and turpentine as well. Just comes out a different way. Again, it's something which is a paste. It can be used in pesto, slightly more satin-like. Have fun with it. See if it works for you.
Okay, so let's go into PM5 and 6, since we're going to have Tim jumping in and talking about how he uses them, and I'm sure, Michael, you use them as well, since you just...
Well, I'm talking rather a lot at the moment. I'm sure people are tired of me, so I'm going to pass this bit to Tim for 5.
You should at least introduce what it is.
Yes.
And then maybe I'll... Yeah.
Okay. Well, it is specifically a glaze medium. It's got Canada balsam in it, and damar, linseed stand oil, and turpentine. Now, interestingly, there's absolutely no dryer in that one. There's no cobalt lanolate, but it's naturally a very fast dryer. I think it must be the Canada balsam that does that, and it is gorgeous. It even smells nice. I mean, fortunately, I'm an artist who I'm not sensitive to turpentines, but as I stressed to anyone out there who's a little bit concerned, and from a health and safety point of view, I shouldn't have said that. But I just love the smell, and I think it's the same stuff that when I was a teenager, I used to do a lot of riding, and we used to paint on horses' hooves. That it's got a very similar smell. Stop horses' hooves cracking and splitting, which it obviously imparted a sort of a bit like a nail varnish for horses. So, but anyway, I'm digressing. But Tim, since you're the hands-on artist, maybe you'd like to talk about how you find PM5.
Yeah, well, I after exploring several of the various mediums during my alla prima painting process, I kind of started gravitating towards one more and more and more, and without even really looking at the bottles, I realized it was PM5, and I found that the time it takes to set and then layer on top of easily without having your initial layers slide around too much and get out of control seemed to be really keyed well for me for an alla prima painting lasting anywhere from 3 to 5 or 6 hours. And the great thing about it is it adds quite a bit of flow. I'm not using it as a glaze. I'm just using it to add into my colors just a little bit to get a flow. And it helps the paint slide really well. So I can get brush stroke that show off the hairs of the brush in many instances. But also it dries with, or sets even with a beautiful sheen to it. So, those of you who might have been dipping heavily into terp to get that flow, this does the same thing as sort of that first medium we were talking about, of giving you some flow. However, it sets up a little quicker. So whereas the first medium, will be a little wet and maybe not set up quite as fast to layer on top as easily, this one becomes very easy to start gooping more and more layers on. So you get through all of the layers of a painting quite quickly, which I started to really, really like. And now I've painted, probably 50 portraits or so with it. And it's become my go-to alla prima painting medium. again, kind of helping me not have to use that idea of that first initial laydown with the terp, the odorless mineral spirits, go straight to the medium. And then when it dries, it's always dried with all of the sheen that it had when it was wet, which is another great thing. I'd never have had to go back and varnish a painting just to restore that juicy wetness to it. And so it's allowed me to have paint a painting and have it look wet and fresh and juicy, and then 3 weeks later I look at it, it still looks the same.
Yeah.
Great.
I mean, this is something that Tim and I have discussed at length, because both he and I, we like our paint to look like it was painted 5 minutes ago. When our paintings dry, we want them to. The idea for us is that even in 50 years' time, we want it to look like it was painted 5 minutes ago. So I know not everyone's like that, but we love the fruity, luscious quality of oil paint. That's what it's all about for us. So we don't like paint to change as it dries and goes matte. I mean, this is why also, although I'm going to digress here slightly, we invented the non-absorbent acrylic primer so that it doesn't suck all the oil out of the paint. I mean, this is something else we can talk about another time, Linda, if we haven't already. If you can set up the correct scenarios with your paintings, be it from the primers through to the various layers and the various mediums you're adding, what I get very frustrated by is when artists come to me and they say, oh, what retouch varnish should I use? And then I have to try and explain to them, well, with my paint you won't need one. Right. Because if you're using the correct grounds and stuff, it's not going to make the paint dry matte unless you've unintentionally put a lot of genuine turpentine in, which dries matte, and now you're starting to fight it. And it's all about sort of understanding what ingredient does what.
Right.
And this phrase oiling out, people talk about, oh, I returned to a canvas and I oiled out to get, to bring back the values. It shouldn't be necessary.
Right.
The only colors in my range that dry slightly differently from when you put them down will be lamp black and the umbers. It's just the nature of the pigment type that they will make paint dry a little bit matte looking. And I mean, one trick I use when I'm painting, particularly with those, is I dribble a little bit of linseed stand oil in, which of course imparts a little bit more gloss, and so it counteracts it as you're painting. So what I get frustrated about a lot of the time is when artists talk about, oh yeah, I use retouch varnish. Now, if you're having to do that, it means that you're starting to fight your materials, because as you'd have been painting, the painting would have been going dull. And I just don't like that. I mean, a lot of people will call me up and they say, I painted yesterday, came in the studio, and today the paint's got dull. And what's caused that? And that's usually because grounds are sucking the oil out of the paint into the, in acrylic primers can be very problematic, and that's why we've developed this one that doesn't do that, non-absorbent acrylic primer. It's called NAAP for short. And again, you can find out about that on our website.
Yeah, I know that just to insert from the artist's point of view, as you know, when we met, I was not painting with your paints. And and I was struggling with trying to get the colors to do what I wanted them to do. And that's when Michael and I had a very long conversation, and basically I converted over to Michael's paints, and I have some very old paintings here that I painted with another brand of paint, and I have your paints, the paintings I did with your paints next to them, and you can just see a world of difference just between the matte and, and the beautiful pigments that have come out in yours, and they're stationary, and that wetness.
Yeah.
So yeah, so there is a difference.
It baffles me slightly. I mean, it's one of those things. Sometimes I feel a bit guilty, because I can, particularly when I'm talking about mature artists who've probably been painting sort of 50 years, and there's this horrible moment where they suddenly realize all the paintings they did, how those paintings could have been.
Yeah, I think you caught me at 15 years, so that was good.
Yeah. Yeah, I had one or two encounters with one or two quite well-known English names, and there was this moment of sadness when, I'd woken up the sleeping dog, if you like. And I can feel a bit guilty, because it's sort of, however you like to think of it, even if it took the painting another 5 or 10% in terms of its fruition, 5 or 10%, of course, is a long way in terms of how a painting can appear.
Yeah.
And it's rather tragic that you know, when you're painting with materials which aren't doing the job as they should, you don't realize it, and that you're fighting them, and you're going to overcompensate, because, for instance, if you're painting on a painting over a number of weeks and you're getting areas going dull and matte looking, and the colors, of course, are just muting, all the subsequent layers of paint you're putting on are going to be compensating for that in one way or another. And it's just adding into the melee of confusion and all the things that can go wrong. I mean, I constantly say to artists, look, painting's hard enough as it is without making it any harder.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to make all these materials your friends so that they behave and do what you want. They're going to help you, not hinder you. And it's almost a philosophical basis more than anything else. It just another one of my great banes, and I've been telling my dear friend Tim here about it, is clean up. You know, I might add, folks, I'm the one who's been cleaning the brushes there, and I'm the one who's been cleaning up the palette. Because I couldn't bear to come into this, where we're painting in our study, I couldn't bear to come in the morning and see this sort of semi-dried leathery paint, which either on remains of brush tips, and it's just one of those things that if you're going to give your painting the best shot you possibly can, that whole lead up to it, you've got to give that the best shot. And so, I mean, there's one of my professors at college years ago, his name was Jeff Colborn, sadly he's passed on now, and he one day in complete despondence, almost yelling at me in a friendly way, was saying, look, Michael, how do you on earth expect to have order in your canvas with a palette like this? And he pointed down and he said, look, if your palette looks like muck with all this horrible dried paint that's just not looking nice, what do you think your painting's going to look like? And the penny dropped at that moment. He said, look, if you can get order on your palette, you stand a chance of getting order. And he pointed over to the canvas. And I thought, that's so obvious. Why didn't I figure that out? But it's one of those things. It's sort of like a riding a bicycle moment. Once you get it, you get it.
You just like pointed out the next bicycle moment, I guess, for me, because I'm bad that way too. I have a bad habit.
Yeah, well, we all have laziness, but I mean, it's just one of those things. Just for the few minutes that it takes, and all that masochism you'd be doing otherwise the next day, particularly when you've got a brush that is leaching in a foreign color to where you're trying to mix and control. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're just your own enemy at that point, and it's just, yeah. I mean, although Tim, as I'm sitting here looking at him, he's got sort of 3 brushes in one hand and then the one in his hand that he's working with, and they've all got various levels of daubs of paint on, and of course he'll probably, depending upon shape and size of brush, he'll flick across and swap out and work with a, shall we say, a not a conflicting color, but I mean
complementary.
Oh, so the word again?
Complementary.
Yeah,
key to the area.
Yeah, a relevant color. So he picks up a brush which is relevant to the color area and works like that. Again, it's another naughty step, because even there is, I know we can't all work with a virgin brush every time we're going to mix an area, but when you're painting in a style like Tim's, where a bum brush stroke in the wrong place is going to stick out like a sore thumb and therefore has to come back out. When he's leading up to delivering a bit of paint down, he might mix around for sort of a few seconds on the palette, and it looks at that moment correct. When he takes it, of course, over to the little canvas, if it's not correct, then he either has to blend it or cover it or swipe it back out somehow. Mm-hmm. And the nature of his paintings is very, as you'll see, everyone, from the photographs we put up, it's very disciplined. Things have to be right. Okay, and this isn't some sort of me grinding an axe. If you're a landscape painter and you didn't quite get the tree right, no one will really completely know, because every tree is different. Whereas you're working with the disciplines of depicting human flesh, it's the difference of me having a scar on my cheek when there's not one there, as it were. So, some brushstrokes have to be dead right, and the way Tim paints, that's the case.
Yeah, well, it was kind of interesting too, because with doing the podcast, there are a number of master artists that I talk to, and I am not going to name any of them, but basically what I find is really interesting is, like, I'll show up at a workshop or we'll get together to paint or whatever, and I'm using your paints. And I think, if you've been painting for 50 years with certain paint, you get very used to knowing what the tricks are to get them,
Sure.
to work for you. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times with your paint, that takes that security away, because they might have to figure out how to paint with your paint, which is different than painting with the other paints. So,
Well, that reminds me of when we met, first of all, Linda, at the weekend of the Masters. It must have been 8-9 years ago, and
yeah.
CW was there, CW Monday.
Uh-huh.
And you might recall we were doing another one of these chat radio things, and CW was in the studio with us, and I just sort of made a remark to CW that if he painted with my paint, it would change his life as an artist.
Mm-hmm.
And those of you who know CW Monday, he's a fantastic guy, and he says what he thinks. He's very straight talking.
Mm-hmm.
And he because it was radio, he was able to pull a face at me as if to say, "What have you just said? Are you mad?" It was something like that. And I reiterated it. I said, if you use my paint, I will change your life in a positive way as an artist. And we came off the air, and he was going to demo with my paints the next day. And he said, "All right, look, if you think that you can change my life as an artist, well, we'll see about that, my friend." And I persuaded him to, I think he was working with about a dozen colors.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of those moments, as soon as he started painting, he went, oh no, this isn't working. Oh no, oh no.
And I remember you being very nervous at that point.
I was nervous, thinking, oh dear, is this the one guy in 1,000? It's just not going to work. These are going to be too powerful for. Then he suddenly went, oh, I get it now. I get it. And then he just went, oh, right. And then he just stopped talking for something like half an hour. I think you were there, weren't you, Linda?
Yeah, I was watching him with you.
Yeah, and he just let rip for about an hour doing the painting on his own. And then he sort of stopped for a moment. He said, Michael Harding said to me yesterday, you've changed my life as an artist. Well, he has. And I think he went back on the radio show the next day with us, and we did and he was noble enough to tell everyone, yeah, he has. And I know CW still uses my paint to this day, and I'm very proud of that. He's a great guy.
Yes, he is.
If you're listening, CW, hi.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't actually talked to CW. I need to actually drop him a note, but and say hi to him, because I haven't. I used to live the state next to him. Like, he was somewhere around Minneapolis, and I was in Ohio. Of course, now I've moved down to North Carolina. So, yeah.
Well, we were at a show last week where I did a sort of a workshop. The Society of American Maritime Artists, I think that's the right title, and CW had been involved with them, and he even had a painting that he'd sent there, and I asked, was he going to be attending, and they said no, because he's got bronchitis.
Oh.
So, of course, that's I know he's had one or two health issues over the last few years, and right now, of course, I don't know when this will be broadcast, Linda, but we're right in the middle of the panic over the virus. So our thoughts are with you, CW. It's not the right time to be getting something like a bronchitis or something. So.
Okay, so we have one medium left, the PM6 Balsam Resin Glaze Medium. Actually,
Linda, you're behind the times. There's a 7th.
Oh, there is? Well, I'm not behind the time. Your website is.
I know. Looking at my own website. I know. I'm the guilty party here. I mean, this is one of these things where it's fun to be. I can wear 2 hats, you see, and I can excuse myself as an eccentric, flaky artist, because we're not the type of guys to have things like that up to speed. I'm not a sort of an insurance company or a bank where everything's state of the art on the moment like that. But yeah, there will be PM7, but I'll talk very briefly about PM6. It's just another form of a glazed medium. It behaves very similarly to the PM5, just a different type of brush quality, brush mark quality. Okay. This one's made with Austrian larch turpentine as opposed to Canada balsam. So it's just a similar variation on the same theme. Fast drying. In fact, I know that it would be interchangeable for Tim in this context. I mean, I use both the 5 and the 6 in my own painting. Again, fast drying, it will get sticky within a a couple of hours. Ideal. I mean, I'm thinking portraits because, of course, Tim's here doing mine.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, many contexts you could use it. I mean, if you were laying down an area of paint, I'm looking out of a window, and I'm fortunate enough we live on a river, so I'm looking at the surface of the river and all those streaky brushstrokes that you get when you're depicting water. It would work in that context. If you wanted to lay down a sort of like a glass-like image of water, it would lend itself perfectly to that area as well, and helps you blend. Okay, PM7.
Yes.
Is designed wholly to be an impasto medium. Mind you, having said that, if you guys want to do something else with it and paint it up thinly, you can. And it is made with fumed silica and linseed oil. So it's a very chunky. It looks like gel.
Oh.
With a slight linseed oil color to it. But it's again a way that you can add to paint up to the volume of about 20–25%, getting sort of impasto layers, or, and I don't really like to say this word, but extender.
Okay.
Yeah. The reason I'm nervous about extender is simply because as soon as you start spreading your pigment particles out more thinly, you're making that surface of paint more vulnerable to UV light and fading. And that doesn't matter whether it's a cadmium or a rose madder. The more dilute they are, the more spread they are, the more thin they are, the more vulnerable they are. Yeah, I don't think I need to say more about that. Yeah. So PM7, and I know now that I've got a few minutes, I've got to see if myself and my daughter can, my daughter does all my social media stuff, and she's a bit of a whiz where it comes to the website, or whether we're gonna, yeah, we should be able to just put an image, get an image in there with more information, guys, on PM7. You can always email me if there's something that, and I know it's available at the moment. So yeah, it's another one. I should send you a sample, Linda. My apologies.
Yeah, that's Tim wants one too. I think.
Say again, Linda.
I said I think Tim wants one too, because I heard him kind of chime in.
Yeah, I'll have to have a look around in a minute, see what I've got.
So
yeah.
Go ahead, Tim. Were you gonna chime in?
No.
I was just thinking aloud.
Okay. So I have a question.
So that's the mediums.
Yeah, that's the mediums. But I have a question still on the mediums. So hold on a second. There was a paint brand that I used when I was painting with Joseph McEarl, wonderful painter, very nice guy. And he uses this oleo pasto. It smells awful. I think by the end of the day, when I was in the conference room over at Art of the Carolinas painting with him, I had a high that lasted for most of the night. Not a good one, a headache. You know, not. I loved what it did texturally, but you can't use this. I mean, that's an outside thing. You outside painting with it, you're great. Inside a studio, you're going to be sick within a few hours. So would your PM7 be considered something that might replace that? Because this is kind of jelly.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a gel, and it's actually silica that's been treated by heat. It's been, without getting too complicated, you're just painting with sand and linseed oil.
Okay.
So there's nothing there that's going to be upsetting anyone.
And it doesn't smell. It probably smells more pleasant.
No, it's not like the other turpentine-based ones I'm talking about. I know Joseph, of course, does those wonderful seascape landscapes, doesn't he? So
yeah. I
know he works a lot with Mark Shasha and sort of partners in crime, as we'd say, in terms of their subject matter. Yeah, so I mean, if Joseph's outside, then of course it wouldn't be a problem to him. There's only I don't know what one that is. They're probably his would have had to give you a headache. Did you say headache or hive?
It's a headache. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, then there will be something in there which was in addition to what I've just described, and of course I couldn't speculate as to what that would. I mean, I can guess a couple of things. It could have been even just turpentine.
Yeah.
But there's so many exotic things that some paint makers choose to put in there, all of which can give headaches. So
Yeah,
But
and I can talk to you offline with that and tell you the brand. I just don't want to call it out on the
no, I
radio.
understand. Yeah, no, I'm not being critical of it anyway. I mean, it's
Right.
like anything. If it might work wonderfully and be very, very permanent, all the rest of it. But if there is a spirit or something volatile in there which gives a headache, then you just got to be aware of it and make sure you're painting out in the open or a well-ventilated studio.
Right. Yeah. We
Uh,
were in a little conference room and, there were 20 of us in there and it was, put your palette out and put that out too. And, we weren't even at the point where we could use it. No comment on, Joe's teaching style or anything. The man is wonderful.
no,
Yeah. I'm still
yeah,
friends with him today. It's great. But yeah, I learned the next day to just leave that in the tube and,
yeah.
and some people had
It's,
a reaction to it and some people didn't. So, that was fine.
I'm fairly lucky. I don't react, and it's just as well, considering how close I am to these materials, obviously.
Right.
And my wife Karen reacts, and so that's one of the reasons why Tim at the moment is confined to not use, has chosen anyway not to use a medium.
Right.
When we set up, we'd have been in another part of the house where Karen doesn't go, and just had the same light arrangement. But
Right.
we've been able to use the main level of the house, and Karen comes in and out because she knows we're not using any of the mediums.
Yeah.
Incidentally, I didn't mention before, some years ago, there was a workshop demo, and there was a lady who sat at the back of the room, and I invited her to come down where she'd be far closer and able to hear and see better. And she said, "Oh no, I can't because I'm sensitive to oil paints because I get headaches." And I just told her straight, "You will not get a headache from my oil paint." And she said, "But all the solvents and things that you paint makers put in." I said, "No, no, no, no solvent at all. You will not get a headache from our paint." And I persuaded her, I think I gave her 2 or 3 tubes. And I said, "Just go home, squeeze a bit out on a palette in the room where you're sitting. If you get a headache, huge apologies, but I'm 100% confident you will not." And she came back the next day because it was a 2-day session thing I was doing, and she was almost in tears. She said, "This is the first time I can now paint with oils in 20 years.
Yeah.
So, and that's, as I stress, is because we do not put all those fillers, extenders, and other cocktail of things into the paint. And I don't really understand exactly why the other paint makers choose to do that. I mean, they do it because they see they're making, it's all about product design. I design the product my way, they do it theirs. And
Mm-hmm.
I often jokingly say it's a bit like different chefs. We all make omelets, but the omelets taste different from one chef to another.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so Tim, how's the painting looking?
Oh, I think we're zeroing in on a finish here, actually.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
the painting looks great, guys. I mean, if you're unfamiliar with Tim's work, do check him out.
Yes. So what I was going to end with is basically what's up next with both you and Tim, if you guys want to talk a little bit about that.
Tim?
Well, news has come through that my next conference is canceled.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, so for the time being, I guess I'll just be painting in my studio until stuff shapes back up again. And we actually two of my conferences have been canceled. So.
Oh, so sorry.
Yeah, so I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how things go. Otherwise, I'll just keep on painting. I'm working on a couple new projects in the studio, but I can't really say too much about them yet, unfortunately.
Hush, hush.
Hush, hush. Yeah.
Very excited.
Yeah. But I'm talking to people about them, and it's been great fun out here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always fun to see Michael and Karen. I always enjoy our times together. So,
likewise, thank you.
Yeah. So it is kind of interesting, I guess, when I think about this show. It is going to be airing forever, on the internet, and this is a time that there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of fears about the coronavirus that is out there, and a lot of things are being canceled. I just got an email from someone that I was asking if they had seen an exhibit that's coming to the Asheville Art Museum, and he said, "Wow, haven't seen it. Would love to see it, but I can't travel because I'm 74." And I was like,
Yeah.
I understand. I totally get it. But it's kind of like the advice I would give to the artists that are there, if you can go live on the internet, if you want to do that while you're painting, that would be something interesting. You're going to have an audience out there looking for something to do because all the sports are being canceled. So, just kind of think of that, and support all of us that are on the web and listen to the podcast and things like that. And just stay safe. Just be with where you're comfortable, what you're comfortable doing. Continue to do that, and be mindful of what's going on in your area. So go ahead, Tim and Michael.
Yeah, I was going to just say from a personal point of view, I mean, as you know, I travel a lot. I came back from the UK 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks ago. And it was starting to feature there then. And I think there'd already been a couple of cases here. But of course, now we've got to a point where it's, and I know I was slightly guilty because I was shrugging my shoulders thinking, oh, this is just an ordinary flu thing. I mean, it comes around and kills lots of people every year. What are they making a fuss about? But then you suddenly realize that there's something very different about this. I mean, maybe the cynic inside of me, I've been discussing this with Tim, of course, as we've been sitting here. And another sad reality of this whole thing is, despite the terrible tragedy of people dying, there'll also be what looks like the financial knock-on now of people's lives being ruined by the financial knock-ons. I think there's already been one small airline in the UK gone down.
Oh.
I mean, you look, and then sort of the cancellation of entry from Europeans to the US, that's going to have a big knock-on effect for airlines. And you think of all the livelihoods if more bigger airlines employing many thousands of people go down, and just that whole thing of redundancy and unemployment and
yeah, you get a really big domino effect. Exactly.
And I mean, I think there's can be even more hardships and to some degree fatalities as a knock-on effect as well if this thing is not if it doesn't pass us by quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I know everyone listening that all right, by the time you probably hear this, you'll have another 10 days or so of hindsight as to what's been going on in the world.
Or years, because my podcasts are out there for many years.
Right.
And I capture these for historical purposes. So it's kind of interesting going into this conversation because, this was the big scare for 2020 right now. And the interesting thing comes is, we're being very cautious with the cancellation of big sporting events and concerts and things like this, but it's all about flattening that curve on the chart that they keep showing every hour or so. But the interesting thing is how everyone is, like our grocery store was more crowded than it ever has been. The toilet paper is off of the shelf, which I don't understand. But
I know you can make alternative arrangements with that particular one. You don't have
absolutely.
Where canned goods you could understand.
Right.
I think also there might just be this thing of thinking, well, we might have a month of discomfort. I want to make sure my favorite chocolate bar is at home, and I want to go and buy 30 of them instead. I mean, who knows? It's different, isn't it? It is a different feeling, and I don't know whether it's because we've had so many years of caution leading up with stories of global warming and some people's denials, and suddenly this lands in our lap, which is, we might have an abundance of medical ability and science, but not quite enough, evidently.
Yeah, it's more along the I guess there was some mathematical equation that they looked at that so much of the staff might come down with it and therefore can't work. And then there's also the limitation of ventilators and things like that. They just don't have enough equipment in the hospital to deal with something.
Well, quite. And and then there's the nightmare of having to choose who gets and who does not.
Exactly. So so it's out of an abundance of caution, not so much that everybody in the world's going to get it and die from it. So
well, I mean, I think if the statistics are roughly correct, even if they're wrong by a bit, it's
still tragic.
Sadly 2 or 3% or perhaps more might die, and that's horrible.
Yeah.
But even if it's 1%. I mean, this knock-on effect of, as you say, the domino effect of the other implications of it. I mean, I was saying to Tim this morning, what happens if the power stations that pump the electricity to us go down because either their workers decide to stay at home, or the whatever fossil fuel they might be burning, or can't get to them? Then the power stations go off, our power goes off, our deep freezes stop keeping goods fresh, our phones don't get charged, and as we know, our phones tend to remain charged a day or two, and it's not long before we haven't got communication. And you know, within 3 days, folks, I think you'll all agree that your food would be rotting in your deep freeze, and your phone would be dead. And apart from if you've got no power, that's it. All you've got to do is walk out and talk to your neighbour. That's all you can do. And then if the gas stations don't have that, I mean, I'm probably scaring people, but it doesn't take long before we're reminded how vulnerable we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I grew up in an age when there was television, but there wasn't very much computer stuff out there.
Yeah.
It was just starting with the moon missions and things, so we didn't have
Yeah,
a personal computer. So yeah, so it's kind of like, well, what did I do back in those days? You know, I went out and played. So maybe I'll
absolutely
play again.
Yeah, and there's no moon mission to watch this time, but there we go.
Yeah, right. Actually, the interesting thing is, right before I came on, I looked at an email from my mobile carrier, and they all have agreed for 3 months to basically not bother their clients, their customers, about pay, because they understand that some of their customers may not be able to pay their bills because they aren't working. They decided to go for 3 months to allow a leniency for 3 months and keep them on the internet, because they understand that people get news this way. And so it's interesting how everybody is adjusting and thinking and willing to do things.
Yeah, I think if it's more than 3 months, then we've got a much, much bigger problem than we thought we had.
Absolutely.
And it's going to be the likes of the disruption that something like a major war like the Second World War did in Europe, where you've got millions of people walking around trying to find a safer place to be, because once the food runs out and the electricity is off and the heating's not working, yeah, as I say, it doesn't take long, does it, when you start to realize we are actually quite vulnerable.
Yep, absolutely. So,
but anyway, on that note,
now that we just brightened everybody's day.
Yeah, just keep painting everyone instead. That's the answer. I mean, I plan to. I mean, Karen and I were meant to be going away next week on our little holiday down to the Caribbean, and the chances are now we won't go because it's just an unnecessary risk. So I will be painting away myself.
Cool.
I was going to be painting away down there anyway, but it'd just be here instead.
Right.
Yeah, I'd like to be in sunshine though.
Absolutely. So again, guys, I wanted to say thank you for being on Art Chat, and I do believe I've taken way over 60 minutes to talk with you, but wanted to handle the resins the mediums.
Yeah, well, they are resins.
Yeah, as best we could, and give people a lot of good information about that. And thank you both for joining me.
It's been a pleasure. It's been fun. Thank you, everyone, for listening to it.
Yeah. So coming up next, I got a couple more Art Chats scheduled. I don't have enough to actually tell you who they are yet because I haven't got a definite date. So kind of scheduling things has been a little sketchy as well. So keep in touch and let me know when you got. Oh, Michael, can I ask you one question? Well, the last time we talked, you were you have new colors coming out. And we were also talking about watercolors. Can we touch on those real quickly?
Yeah, sure. I've got several new colors in the oils coming out. One particular one, which is unusual, which no one else does in an oil, which is Pigment Violet 29. You'll find it in watercolor. Tim's been working with it.
Love it.
He hasn't. Unfortunately, I gave my last tube to Kwang Ho, who also loved it. When Tim arrived the other day, he said, "Oh, have you got that new violet?" And I said, "It's the one thing I haven't got," because it's become a way of life for Tim, because I gave him one tube as well. It's Perylene Violet, PV29. and it's sort of quite a modest color in oil. I have to say, it's a sort of subtle color. It's not a poke your eye out, bright, brilliant violet or anything like that. It's just a smoky sort of violet. Does wonderful things with yellows, from my point of view. And then I've got Pigment Red 254, which is a DPP pigment, which is a sort of, there's a mouthful of what that stands for, which I, sitting here, I just can't quite remember. I dye painted something or other. It's very light, fast, brilliant red pigment. That's coming out. And also anthraquinine blue, pigment blue 60. We've had many, many requests for that. Those three colors I formulated and made last time I was in the UK. So they will be finding their way, once we've had the toxicological guys tell us what we have to have on our labels for the United States, they'll be finding their way to the US.
Great.
What else? Watercolors still on track. It's just taking longer and longer than we thought.
Okay.
Mechanical boring reasons. Unfortunately, one of my members of staff came to me and said, Michael, you know you've got us a nice new tube filling machine for these watercolors. And I'm like, yes. Who's going to be doing the labeling? And I said, well, you guys. And my production guy said, look, I've just calculated it will take one man 3 years to label all the tubes you're intending to fill. And I went, oh. And he said, alternatively, 3 men 1 year. It's up to you. And so I then realized I had to commission a labeling machine, and we're waiting for that to be delivered.
Oh, okay.
So that's a bit of hardware which we have to have, because we're getting to a point now, you know, we're still a hands-on, handmade company, but where it comes to putting labels on by a person's fingers, and the tubes, of course, are little 15 mil sized tubes.
Right.
It's a bit fiddly for nice big Welsh guys whose families were normally in the coal mines, and now they're sort of expected to have dainty small fingers to put labels on tubes. So yes, I've got a little machine coming which will be able to label the tubes for us. Great. So once that arrives, then it's all hands on deck labeling, and again, then we've got to get the toxicological people to tell us what we have to put on the labels for the United States. And then, you know, the health and safety Prop 65 stuff. And then they'll be out there, I'm pleased to say. Tim's worked with them, Kwong's worked with them. In fact, Kwong did a painting, which I've got in the framers at the moment, because I went and stayed with Kwong and his fiancée, Adrienne, and he just doodled. You know what Kwong's like. He just can make things dribble off the end of his brush like it's magic. And he rattled off this portrait. And when I get it back from the framers, I'll send you a photograph, and it's just a great little painting he just put together in like 15, 20 minutes from his imagination of a man's face. And it shows the watercolors and he just fell in love with them. So I'm really, it's probably going to be dare I say, for me, the most exciting bit of my paint making career since I launched the oils, for obvious reasons. It's, you know, I from time to time add colors, add mediums, but this is going to be a real, well, I'm 61 now. This will probably be the last major project that sees me out until I can paint off into the sunset myself. So, yeah, help willing.
Yeah, well, when they are launched, let me know, because I do have watercolors that listen to the podcast as well, and we'll get you on to have you talk about the watercolor process and your colors.
Thank you, Linda.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that.
Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you again, Michael and Tim, and thank you all for tuning in and listening. Have a great day.